a series of tweets, sort of a tweet thread of 15 tweets that assesses the quality of the evidence for masks, pros and cons, and sort of where that's not going to go viral, but a smackdown for a famous politician who is famously in favor of masks, who also went to a dinner and didn't wear a mask, that's going to go viral. And, that's partly human nature. People love to call out hypocrisy and all of that, but it's partly what these systems elevate automatically. I talk about this with respect to Facebook, for example. So I think Facebook has done a pretty good job, although it's taken longer than it should in some cases. But, if you have a very large following and you're really spouting hatred or misinformation, disinformation, they've kicked people off. They've done, some reasonable things there. But actually, the deeper issue is of this the anger we're talking about, of the contentiousness of everything. I make a family example with two great stereotypes. So one, the crackpot racist uncle, and one, the sweet grandma. And I always want to point out all of my uncles in my family were wonderful people. So I didn't have a crackpot racist, but everybody knows the stereotype. Yes. Well, so grandma, she just posts like sweet comments on the kids' pictures and congratulates people on their wedding anniversary. And crackpot uncle's posting his nonsense. And normally, it's sort of at Christmas dinner, everybody rolls their eyes. Oh, yeah, Uncle Frank's here. He's probably going to say some racist comment, and we're going to tell him to shut up, or, maybe let's not invite him this year. The normal human drama. He's got his three mates down at the pub who listen to him and all of that. But now, grandma's got, 54 followers on Facebook, which is the intimate family, and racist uncle has 714. So he's not a massive influencer or whatever, but how did that happen? It's because the algorithm notices, when she posts, nothing happens. He posts, and then everybody jumps in to go, God, shut up, Uncle Frank, that's outrageous. And it's like, there's engagement, there's page views, there's ads, right? And those algorithms, I think they're working to improve that, but it's really hard for them. It's hard to improve that if that actually is working. If the people who are saying things that get engagement, if it's not too awful, but it's just, maybe it's not a racist uncle, but maybe it's an uncle who posts a lot about what an idiot Biden is, right? Which isn't necessarily an offensive or blockable or bannable thing, and it shouldn't be. But if that's the discourse that gets elevated because it gets a rise out of people, then suddenly in a society, it's like, we get more of what we reward. So I think that's a piece of what's gone on.
Well, if we could just take that tangent, I'm having a conversation with Mark Zuckerberg, second time. Is there something you can comment on how to decrease toxicity on that particular platform, Facebook? You also have worked on creating a social network that is less toxic yourself.
Yeah.
So can we just talk about the different ideas that these already big social networks can do and what you have been trying to do?
So a piece of it is it's hard. So the problem with making a recommendation to Facebook is that I actually believe their business model makes it really hard for them. And I'm not anti-capitalism. I'm not, great. Somebody's got business, they're making money. That's not where I come from. But certain business models mean you are going to prioritize things that maybe aren't that long-term healthful. And so that's a big piece of it. So certainly for Facebook, you could say, with vast resources, start to prioritize content that's higher quality, that's healing, that's kind. Try not to prioritize content that seems to be just getting a rise out of people. Now, those are vague human descriptions, right? But I do believe good machine learning algorithms, you can optimize in slightly different ways. But to do that, you may have to say, actually, we're not necessarily going to increase page views to the maximum extent right now. And I've said this to people at Facebook. It's like, if your actions are, convincing people that you're breaking Western civilization, that's really bad for business in the long run. Certainly these days, I'll say Twitter is the thing that's on people's minds as being more upsetting at the moment. But I think it's true. And so one of the things that's really interesting about Facebook compared to a lot of companies is that Mark has a pretty unprecedented amount of power. His ability to name members of the board, his control of the company is pretty hard to break, even if financial results aren't as good as they could be, because he's taken a step back from the perfect optimization to say, actually, for the long-term health in the next 50 years of this organization, we need to rein in some of the things that are working for us and making money because they're actually giving us a bad reputation. So one of the recommendations I would say is, and this is not to do with the algorithms and all that, but how about just a moratorium on all political advertising? I don't think it's their most profitable segment, but it's given rise to a lot of deep, hard questions about dark money, about ads that are run by questionable people that push false narratives, or the classic kind of thing is you run. I saw a study about Brexit in the UK where people were talking about there were ads run to animal rights activists saying, finally, when we're out from under Europe, the UK can pass proper animal rights legislation. We're not constrained by the European process. Similarly, for people who are advocates of fox hunting, to say, finally, when we're out of Europe, we can re-implement. So you're telling people what they want to hear. And in some cases, it's really hard for journalists to see that. So it used to be that for political advertising, you really needed to find some kind of mainstream narrative. And this is still true to an extent. Mainstream narrative that 60% of people can say, oh, I can buy into that, which meant it pushed you to the center. It pushed you to sort of try and find some nuanced balance. But if your main method of recruiting people is a tiny little one-on-one conversation with them because you're able to target using targeted advertising, suddenly you don't need consistent. You just need a really good targeting operation, really good Cambridge Analytica style machine learning algorithm data to convince people. And that just feels really problematic. So, I mean, until they can think about how to solve that problem, I would just say, you know what, it's going to cost us X amount, but it's going to be worth it to kind of say, you know what, we actually think our political advertising policy hasn't really helped contribute to discourse and dialogue and finding reasoned middle ground and compromise solutions. So let's just not do that for a while until we figure that out. So that's maybe a piece of advice I'd give.
And coupled with, as you were saying, recommender systems for the news feed and other contexts that don't always optimize engagement, but optimize the long-term mental well-being and balance and growth of a human being.
Yeah.
But it's a very difficult problem.
It's a difficult problem. Yeah. And, so with WT Social, Wiki Tribune Social, we're launching in a few months' time a completely new system, new domain name, new lots of things. But the idea is to say, let's focus on trust. People can rate each other as trustworthy, rate content as trustworthy. You have to start from somewhere. So it'll start with a core base of our tiny community who I think are sensible, thoughtful people. We want to recruit more. But to say, you know what, actually, let's have that as a pretty strong element to say, let's not optimize based on what gets the most page views in this session. Let's optimize on what sort of the feedback from people is. This is meaningfully enhancing my life. Mm-hmm. And so part of that is, and it's probably not a good business model, but part of that is say, okay, we're not going to pursue an advertising business model, but a, membership model where, you don't have to be a member, but you can pay to be a member. You maybe get some benefit from that. But in general, to say, actually, the problem with, and actually the division I would say is, and the analogy I would give is broadcast television funded by advertising gives you a different result than paying for HBO, paying for Netflix, paying for whatever. And the reason is, if you think about it, what is your incentive as a TV producer? You're going to make a comedy for ABC network in the US. You basically say, I want something that almost everybody will like and listen to. So it tends to be a little blander, family friendly, whatever. Whereas if you say, Oh, actually, I'm going to use the HBO example and an old example. You say, you know what? Sopranos isn't for everybody.
Mhm.
Sex and the City isn't for everybody. But between the two shows, we've got something for everybody that they're willing to pay for.
Mhm.
So you can get edgier, higher quality, in my view, content rather than saying it's got to not offend anybody in the world. It's got to be for everybody, which is really hard. So same thing, here in a social network, if your business model is advertising, it's going to drive you in one direction. If your business model is membership, I think it drives you in a different direction. And I've said this to Elon about Twitter Blue, which I think wasn't rolled out well and so forth, but it's like, the piece of that I like is to say, look, actually, if there's a model where your revenue is coming from people who are willing to pay for the service, even if it's only part of your revenue, if it's a substantial part, that does change your broader incentives to say, actually, are people going to be willing to pay for something that's actually just toxicity in their lives? Now, I'm not sure it's been rolled out well. I'm not sure how it's going. And maybe I'm wrong about that as a, as a plausible business model. But I do think it's interesting to think about just in broad terms, business model drives outcomes in sometimes surprising ways, unless you really pause to think about it.